Your family used to be very close, but that all changed in 2003 when your father, now 55, discovered that your mother, 54, had been having an affair with his childhood best friend, John, also 54. John was like a brother to your father and was even the best man at your parents' wedding. The discovery devastated your dad, but he still begged your mother to stay and try to work things out. However, your mom chose to leave him for John, and they divorced soon after. 5 months later, your mom married John. At that time, you and your twin sister, Sarah, who are now both 27, were the only children still living at home. Your father had always doted on Sarah, spoiling her a bit more than the rest of you, and she had been the stereotypical daddy's girl. So it came as a shock when Sarah decided to live with your mom after the divorce, while you stayed with your dad. On weekends, she would visit you and your father, but her choice still deeply hurt him. While he tried to put on a brave face, you could hear him crying himself to sleep for nearly a year after the divorce. Despite this pain, his relationship with Sarah didn't seem to change much at first. He continued to spoil her and remained a very involved father, attending all her school events, recitals, and games. However, things began to shift when Sarah decided not to pursue medical school. Despite having always expressed a desire to follow in your father's footsteps, he's a surgeon. Instead, under pressure from your mom and John, who are both lawyers, she chose to become a lawyer. John even mentored her through law school and eventually helped her get a job at his law firm. This new closeness between Sarah and John further strained her relationship with your father. In 2017, Sarah got married. Your father, who loves weddings, was thrilled and gave her a blank check to plan her dream wedding, just as he had done for all his children. However, for Sarah, he was especially excited because she was his only daughter, and he had always talked about how much he looked forward to walking her down the aisle. But just one day before the wedding, Sarah told your father that both he and John would be walking her down the aisle together. This devastated your dad, who is normally very non-confrontational. For the first time, you saw him get really angry, and they had a massive fight. In the end, he didn't attend the wedding, and John walked Sarah down the aisle alone. The fallout from this decision was enormous. After the wedding, your father and his side of the family disowned Sarah, and their relationship became almost non-existent. Sarah tried several times to make amends, but your father refused to speak to her or even hear about her. When she gave birth in 2018, the family hoped he might soften and want to meet his grandchildren, but he still refused. Earlier this year, your father was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer. Despite his illness, he continued to refuse contact with Sarah. She doesn't understand why he won't reconcile with her, and you, being very close to your dad, are struggling with this as well. You've been trying to convince Sarah to let go and accept that he may never want to repair their relationship. Unfortunately, your dad's health took a rapid turn for the worse shortly after you posted the original story, and he passed away exactly 1 month ago. His final weeks were filled with intense pain, and while it was heartbreaking to lose him, you also felt that he deserved to find peace after all the suffering he had endured. In his final moments, he was lucid enough to say his goodbyes to you and your older brothers. Hearing his parting words was both one of the most painful and beautiful moments of your life, and though you will carry the grief, you are grateful that you could be there with him until the end. After my dad passed away, his final words to me carried so much weight. I won't share exactly what he said because they're far too personal, but his goodbye left a lasting impression. One of the most emotional moments was when he said goodbye to my daughters, who are only 11 months and 2 years old. It reminded me of my own childhood. He gave each of them a kiss on the forehead, told them to be good girls, and said that he loved them. It was a moment I will never forget, and it hurts deeply that they are too young to fully understand what happened. They still ask about Grandpa, and every time I try to explain that he's not coming back, they don't quite grasp it. How could they? Even at 27, I can't fully comprehend it myself. I always thought I'd have so many more years with my dad, and it feels incredibly unfair that our time was cut short. The hardest part for me, though, is that my twin sister, Sarah, never reconciled with Dad before he died. I tried talking to him about her several times, but he refused to even consider speaking with her. As Dad's condition worsened, Sarah became more desperate, but by then it was too late. He passed away, and she was still in denial. At his funeral, Sarah saw him for the first time since the night before her wedding, and she barely recognized him. Dad had always been a little overweight, but the cancer had taken such a toll that he was unrecognizably thin. Sarah cried throughout the entire service. Our mother and John, the man Mom left Dad for, showed up at the funeral. Needless to say, their presence wasn't welcome, and my uncles had to physically kick them out. Good riddance. As expected, Dad's will divided his money and properties equally among all his children, including Sarah. He even left trust funds for all his grandkids, despite never meeting Sarah's children. That's just the kind of person he was. He never cared about money, only about making sure we were all comfortable and taken care of. The tricky part was the personal items Dad left behind. He wrote deeply personal letters to each of us, except Sarah. In my letter, Dad reminisced about our relationship and shared memories from my childhood. It was beautiful and heart-wrenching at the same time. I've read that letter 100 times, and I cry every single time. Along with the letter, he gave us photo albums filled with pictures from our childhood, each with a short note he had written on the back, explaining where and when the photo was taken. This was so typical of Dad, thoughtful and sentimental. He must have done this long before his health declined. It was a deeply touching goodbye gift, something I'll treasure forever. Sarah, however, didn't get a letter. Her album had no notes on the photos. When she found out, she completely broke down. The regret and guilt were overwhelming for her, and she ended up being hospitalized for a week. Fortunately, she's starting to recover little by little. Her husband and I are hopeful that she's on the right path. She's eating and sleeping more regularly now, although she still cries several times a day. I tell myself that she's getting better, but it's hard to watch her go through this pain. To make things even more emotional, my wife and I recently found out that we're expecting another child. It wasn't planned. My wife had switched birth control, and there was a brief gap where she didn't take the pill. It's still very early in the pregnancy, so we haven't told anyone yet. But despite the excitement, I'm incredibly angry. I'm furious that my future child will never get to meet my dad. It doesn't seem fair at all. I'm pissed, to be honest. Dad was supposed to be there to guide me through this process. He was teaching me so much about fatherhood with my daughters, and now I have to face this without him. I'm scared, terrified, actually, that I won't be able to be the kind of father to my kids that he was to me. They deserve that, and I don't know if I'm capable of filling those shoes. Every day, I play through all the what-if scenarios in my head. What if things had gone differently? What if Dad and Sarah had made amends? What if he hadn't gotten sick? But no matter how much I think about it, nothing changes. The reality is that life isn't fair. It's rarely, if ever, fair. I want to thank everyone who gave me advice and reached out with support during this difficult time. Your words meant a lot to me when I was feeling incredibly lonely. Still do, honestly. This year has been brutal, but I appreciate all the kindness and support that's come my way. It truly helped more than I can express.